Hello and welcome to the WS podcast. My name is Wojciech Salski, I'll be your host for today. And before we begin, may I just remind you, if you find this podcast useful and you think it is worth your while and you'd like to share it with a friend, please make sure to do so. It helps the podcast to grow, it helps me to reach new people and essentially makes my effort worth even more. It's sort of like a compounding effect of a sort, I would say. And also, please make sure to subscribe and follow. That way you can always get a notification when the new episode is out. And it also allows me to reach out to you more easily by seeing your presence, especially on, YouTube or Fountain or Spotify. Or Apple Podcast for that matter, from where the majority of you, my dear listeners, are from. Apparently, United States is big on Apple Podcasts. So, other than that, if you'd like to support the podcast in any other way, please follow the link below. There are options there. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for joining, really. Yet again, I have quite a spontaneous episode for you. It is gonna be an expose of a sort, maybe. I was thinking whether or not to do an episode dedicated to the whole Bitcoin again. It feels to me that it's true to me to share it with you, and I'm gonna try to help you answer this question: why shouldn't you buy Bitcoin? And basically, I guess as you go through this episode with me, I have some notes that I'll pull up on the screen in a moment. I'll try to, in as great depth as I can, with my limited understanding still of all these ideas, I'll try to make a case for why you should or shouldn't care. And I called this episode why you shouldn't buy Bitcoin for a reason. I think it's first of all, it's a play on words, obviously, because personally I would encourage you to consider getting Bitcoin for yourself. But I was thinking how to make the episode's title more appealing. And funnily enough, I think in many ways it will attract those, I hope to be able to attract also those who are skeptical and unlikely to click on an episode if it's considering Bitcoin as a good idea. So, I've been listening to a lot of great shows that I'm gonna link below, and maybe some of them I'll mention as we go. And I'm an avid listener of many of theirs, and my podcast is not Bitcoin specific. I've had a few episodes before that sort of mentioned it. We never really gotten a chance to go as much in depth as I think I hope to try and go in today. But I was thinking, first of all, why people click on an episode's title? Well, probably because they are interested in the topic. And then does that mean that you're preaching to the choir? If someone's already interested in the topic of Bitcoin, then they have so many other better shows out there to be pointed to, which I will point you to as well in the links below, and I'll mention some of them. So I thought, let's try to also address these that are unlikely to click on a Bitcoin focused episode. I will mention just at the beginning, it's a sort of a disclaimer, I guess, for the benefit of me not being sued by anyone, that this is not financial advice. This is pure entertainment. I'm hoping that it will be educational in some ways, and I will point you in the direction of sources that you can use to educate yourself further. And the bottom line would definitely be, from my perspective, get yourself educated. There is only so much an ignorant punk like myself can do to help you understand. And I'll do my best to articulate myself clearly. I'll point you in the right directions. But as they say, you can bring a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. And I would encourage you from the top of my heart, the top of my soul, the top of my mind, to dive deeper into these themes and topics. So I actually have a bullet point list of things that I want to mention, and forgive me if I don't go in depth enough for you to understand everything. Quite frankly, even though I do think by now I have listened and read an equivalent of something like probably 200, 300 hours worth of reading and listening of content dedicated to understanding this topic and topics surrounding it, intertwined and so forth, I would argue that that's still not enough for me to be able to express its depth. And I think it's a lifelong journey, and I'm inviting you to jump into that journey with me. And as well, I hope that by the end of this episode, you will know why you shouldn't buy Bitcoin, and I'll try to point out those reasons as we go. So yeah, please bear with me. I hope to not disappoint all those out there who are trailing the paths with these educational shows. My big three, let's say, if I were to try and point out my big three shows that I've been listening to religiously by now, is the What is Money show, which I've already mentioned to you before, by Robert Breedlove and nowadays also Eric. And the Bitcoin podcast, of course, some know it as Titcoin, with Walker, an amazing host and an amazing show, very, very informative. And then the third one is a really difficult for me because I actually listened to like 5 more, but it would have to be either What Bitcoin Did, Simply Bitcoin, or You're the Voice by Efrat. So I'll make sure to link all these shows below. Please forgive me, all of you out there who think there are better shows to listen to and learn about Bitcoin and Bitcoin related ideas. Maybe I've just not yet discovered them, but I'll make sure to link below all the shows that I can vouch for, that I've gotten quality content from, and so you will have plenty to choose from, and there will be plenty of ways you can dive deeper into these topics. So let me start by a broad introduction, even though we did make an episode before about the Bitcoin standard. We talked about money in the episode Let's Talk About Money. And I did point out some problems of central banking and fractional reserve banking, which we are suffering from, side effects or effects really from. Some of you might just not know it. And all these episodes are available on the show, so I'll link them below as well. I'll make sure to link as much content for you as possible so you can really explore that. Now let's introduce what is Bitcoin. So in terms of a definition, I guess one could say that it's a decentralized cryptocurrency. Crypto does not mean, I always thought that cryptocurrency stands for like it being cryptic, like hidden. In some ways it is, but it actually stems from the idea that it's encrypted, right? So it's actually coded to being decoded, and that act of coding and decoding is actually stands at the root of the proof of work, which is essentially a fancy way of explaining, exploring this idea that it is worth what the energy was used and computation it was used for at its foundation to mine it, right? So the proof of work ensures, with many additional parts to it, and I don't want to get bogged down into technical details. Quite frankly, I don't comprehend them enough to be, of authority in that manner. But essentially, imagine as if maybe there is 10 of us sitting in a room, and there is an equation that is really difficult to fix, to decode, essentially. And imagine that decoding that equation takes our energy, right? It takes time and energy. And of course, if you have more advanced tools and maybe more energy to give, maybe because some of us work in groups and some of us are on our own. Some of us calculate faster, some of us might have calculators, some of us might be using some additional tools to make the calculation even better. We're participating in this contest of trying to figure out what that equation is. And the moment that equation is figured out, that person or that group that managed to guess the answer, let's say decode it, gets to mine a piece of Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin is infinitely divisible. At the moment, one Bitcoin can be divided into 100 million Satoshis. I hope I'm not mistaken it here. Please don't quote me on this. Check it out. But let's not get bogged down into details yet again. But essentially, out of this contest in the room, one of the groups or one person figured it out. They get to reap the reward of this effort, which is that proof of work, right? The energy that they put in, the technology, all of that, they fixed it. They fixed the equation, so they get to show to everyone else that that's true. And then everyone else is checking that what they did is correct. And they start working on the next stage, the next block in that chain of equations. And this is going on until all Bitcoin is mined, which is estimated to be somewhere around 2037 or 2045, depending on how fast it will accelerate. Now, there are some additional aspects to it, so please make sure to explore it. But in terms of its the information that is useful for you as an average Jane and Joe out there who just clicked to reassure yourself why you shouldn't buy Bitcoin, you should understand that Bitcoin, at the root of Bitcoin lies the fact that it's proof of work that gives its essential value, I would say, that a foundational value. It cannot be just faked into existence. There has to be an effort expended to get it. And then it's extremely, ultimately finite and scarce. So there only can be 21 million Bitcoin. And after that, after all of that is mined, there won't be any more of that, which is a really important thing, and we'll come back to that in a second. Now, in terms of the history of Bitcoin and its development, in many ways we don't know how did it come about. We know of this mysterious person, or maybe a group, maybe a project, maybe a psyop called Satoshi Nakamoto. And supposedly in 2009, for Halloween day, he it started mining first Bitcoin, right? And ever since then, for a long time, it was this sort of silly electronic email fake money. I think many people still, including yourself probably, if you did click on this because you're trying to convince yourself to keep your blinders on and not listen to your crazy friend trying to convince you to care. I know how that must feel because I'm one of those friends. We don't know exactly, the origin. There are speculations out there. I think, from my perspective, it's actually good that we don't know, because that way it is much more difficult to be co-opted if you don't know who's at the root of it. Even though by now some argue that it's no longer eligible to be co-opted. Of course, if the maker was discovered, potentially they could face some risks. And as we'll explore later in this episode, I think there are many reasons to believe and worry about one's safety when one comes up with ideas such revolutionary as this technology, essentially. But at its essence, in layman's terms, it's the centralized public ledger digital currency, and it's finite, so it's ultimately scarce, which is important, and we'll come back to that, as I said. And over these years, it sort of ticked along. For many years, it was considered to be a bit of a joke. For many years, I think still up to even today, it's very, very early in its adoption, even though there might be the zeitgeist change, and you might have clicked on this episode because of that change, because you've heard it again and again, and now you finally want to find the reason to shut up that friend of yours. But the point is, it is a sort of, I guess, digital currency, digital gold, some say, that was created at its root is blockchain, proof of work, decentralization, and this scarcity, which essentially means there is only so many of it. There will only be ever so much of it, so many of it, and that's it. So, in the context of traditional finance and global economy, quite frankly, the parallels that can be drawn, many argue about it. Many better than myself argue about the parallels being appropriate or not. From my perspective, the way I understand it, it's it can be a case can be made for Bitcoin to be considered like digital cash, ultimately private digital cash, and we'll explore that privacy in a second, but also as digital gold, as a store of value, right? Because an important maybe asterisk in terms of that store of value thing is the idea of inflation. And you can inflate anything, you can dilute any material, anything. Maybe when you're making tea, if you pour too much water into already made tea, at some point you will not be able to taste that there was ever tea inside. That's the dilution. In terms of currency, inflation is this experience you have, maybe not realizing it, that even though you, for example, have 10 pounds, and it seems like 10 pounds used to be able to buy you an X amount, let's say 20 apples. Now, after a few years' time, it can buy you 8 apples. And the question is, does that mean that the price of apples inflated? so grew? Or does it mean that the value of your pounds went down? And so it's this funny trick, I think, unfortunately, that is being played and used to gaslight us as a society, as everyday users of these medium of exchange, which is money, to pretend that it's the price that goes up. And of course, that's what you see, right? It's much easier to see the price of your local Apple salesman constantly going up than to notice that at the root of that price going up is not the fact that these apples are becoming better and better and therefore more expensive, or it's not because the Apple salesman is more and more greedy and wants to charge you more for the same amount, but rather as he experiences the difficulty of using that £10 to pay for other things, and as that £10 becomes less and less valuable on the market, he needs to raise the prices to sort of fend off that inflation. And unfortunately, it's a race that cannot be won, because as we talked about the proof of work, at the root of the proof of work is this idea, similar to how gold is being mined, that only those that expand energy, that expand resources, can gain and sort of earn that value. And therefore, that value has a foundation of value being put into it, and then you store it or you pass it on by buying an apple or something like that. Whereas, unfortunately, in terms of your pound, euro, dollar, stuff like that, even if you've not heard about it before, and even if it does sound crazy, which I know, I thought initially that it does, it costs less to print a £5 note than the £5 note is supposedly value at face value, right? Like if I write on a piece of paper £5, it costs me less to produce that than £5. So at its essence, that money is not worth what the resources that were put into it. And of course, this means, and I know it sounds fucking crazy, this means that whoever is able to print it can gain basically free money. But the eerie joke about this, the unfortunate truth, is that it's not free, because for every £5 note that is being printed, all the notes, all the money already in circulation in the economy is paying by being devalued, right? So this is the mind experiment that I really want to explore with you. And this is why one of the reasons why you shouldn't buy Bitcoin. Wink, wink. Wink, wink. Let's say that there are, yet again, 10 people in the room, right? And each of us has £10 note. So overall, there is £100 here, right? Let's say that there are 10 apples, and so each of us can buy one apple for £10. Easy. The apple salesman is happy, we're happy, your money is worth your while, right? Now imagine that one of us is a part of an organization or a group or a club of people that print money. And let's say that person, not telling anyone else, although sometimes they could tell you, of course, the question is, will you be able to do anything about it? Unfortunately, you can't, not for the most part. Let's say that one person suddenly prints 10 more banknotes for themselves. So now there is 9 people with £10 each and one person with £110 in their pocket. Well, first of all, the Apple salesman suddenly has a choice, right? They don't have to sell these apples for £10 anymore. He could put the price higher because there is someone who's going to be able to pay that price, right? So straight away, just in this even distribution, it's no longer even, right? There is one person in the room that has much more money than everyone else, and then they could effectively even offer to the Apple salesman more than all of us together can pay and buy all of these apples. That's how you would create a monopoly, for example. But that's beside the point. Now, what that means to our £10 each is that is no longer as valuable as it was before, because now a £10 note is no longer 1/10 of the whole market, right? Money in circulation, but it's, 1/20th? Effectively, this printing from one person cut all of our banknotes value by half. Don't quote me on this. In terms of maths in my head, especially when I'm trying to articulate myself, I might be making mistakes. I'm sorry. I'm just a person. But do you get the point? What happened is they might have even spent £10 to make that printing, but effectively, because they printed the same money that we have in our pockets, and for you to have it in your pocket, you had to work hard at your job, and they just click the button and they print, they stole value from you. And then they will say that the prices of apples are going up, and that's the inflation. And that's effectively what is going on at all times, with stops along the way, for over, I would say, over 100 years now, with booms and busts and with cycles. And I don't want to, I don't want to go too much into detail, because I might make a mistake and, bore you to death or make you be confused about it. But also, because it's just a much bigger topic than even an hour worth of your time. So effectively, because of that printing, everyone else has to pay the price. And that's what you do every day when you use a currency that someone else, and there are banks called central banks, and there are banks called banks, and there is a huge industry that effectively can do just that. And there are levels to it. Please check out the episode about the creature from Jekyll Island to understand this even deeper. So now the difference between that and mining gold or mining Bitcoin is of course this idea that because there is a limited amount, and we know from the beginning there is a limited amount, it's much less likely that suddenly my money, which I already have in my pocket, my Bitcoin, which I already have in my pocket, my gold, which I already have in my pocket, will become much less valuable in comparison to the whole market. Of course, let's say an asteroid hits Earth and it has all the gold in it. Yeah, that would probably inflate the value of gold, as effectively rendering it less valuable. But assuming that's not going to happen, it's on average 2% per year inflation in terms of gold being mined, right? So there is a huge difference. If I need to exert energy to get something, and you can just click a button to get something, well, guess who's winning in this scenario? There is only so much energy I can exert. There is only so much time I have in my day to earn, right? I'm recording this after work. I've worked today so I can get energy in the form of money, so I could then use that money to buy myself things that someone else exerted energy to produce, right? Well, that's not the case if you're the one producing money, because you can just print money. And yeah, mind-blowing, but true. So now, in terms of the limitations and flaws of the system, and why you shouldn't, or maybe should, consider Bitcoin, is first and foremost this idea of inflation, which we've just tackled, and secondly, centralization. So if there is only one group of people that can print, and there is only one group of people that can announce that, for example, this money is no longer useful. Let's say that they suddenly change the coins into red coins, and all the coins that you have in your pocket are no longer useful. Well, guess what? They can do that. Your government could tomorrow decide that all the pounds that we're using in UK are no longer useful, and now we're going to be using, I don't know, monopoly money for transacting. And they could literally render all of your savings, inexistent, right? Well, in a decentralized system, in a system that does not rely on one person, one group deciding what the system is, how the system works, you cannot just click the button, delete people's savings and so forth. So this is why decentralization of Bitcoin is something that, especially in regimes, in systems where people feel oppressed, in systems where governments are overreaching in their freedoms to act as the big brothers of the world, alternative payment models such as paying in Bitcoin or paying in gold, paying in silver, paying in cigarettes, really whatever, that's where it plays a greater role. And I want to share a caveat here, something that on the daily basis when I talk to people and when I bore my wife to death with fun facts about the economy and about Bitcoin and about gold and about the world, I rarely talk with people who adopted gold, adopted Bitcoin, adopted some other means of payment out of necessity. For the most part, I am blessed to be living in in one of the countries where there isn't any major war, major crisis. I don't have to hide from everyone and everywhere at all times. And so I've not realized the power of this decentralized, anonymous, essentially, money. And please explore the topic, why is it anonymous? I'll talk briefly about privacy, but it's a very dense and deep topic to explore. Only from listening to sources, watching documentaries about people in Africa or in Central America, have I realized and could experience just how powerful it can be for someone who has no other choice. Imagine that your money is being inflated so fast that by the time you leave your workplace and you arrive home, the value of that money you've earned and was paid is already worth less than half of it. Well, that's what happens in hyperinflation, and that's what happened in Venezuela, that's what happened in Argentina, that's what happened all over the globe. And in many of those places, that's where, after some time, or with some luck, or with some people who did think outside the box, these tools, such as Bitcoin, become life-changing, because suddenly you can put your money straight away into something that cannot be hyperinflated at the click of a button. A story closer to my heart, although I've not lived through it, a revaluation of Polish currency after the Soviet Union basically controlling, after the Soviet Union fell in 89, Polish currency was in such an inflated state that my father paid 1,000,000 zloty for some of his things. Some of the, I think it was either a cameraman or the musician, to stay a few hours longer during their wedding, because and that's, let's be honest, it's not that that cameraman was so amazing that he was worth 1,000,000 zloty for a few hours worth of work, right? It's simply because at the time the currency was so devalued that for 1,000,000 zloty you could buy an hour or two worth of time of a musician. Suffice to say that with my 100 zloty in my pocket, I could probably maybe buy myself a lollipop. I don't know if even that. So hyperinflation is something that happens with currencies that are based on the traditional fractional reserve banking system all the time. It's mind-blowing how often it happens. It essentially happens all across the history that we know, as far as we can tell, including ancient Rome. A funny thing about ancient Rome, not so funny really, but their inflation system was they would clip coins. They would literally cut. As you entered Rome, you would have to pay a tax to enter Rome, and they would clip a little bit from your coin to melt it back and print more coins. But essentially over time, what that meant is obviously money devalued, right? You could buy less with the same amount, and then Rome fell. Some argue that Rome fell exactly because of that. Of course, we don't know. The cycles of empires rising and falling is an endless mystery, but it still seems to be always quite similar. As Mark Twain supposedly said, history does not repeat, it rhymes. And according to Ray Dalio, and I will actually link, and I'll take a note of that. I'll link two videos for you, which are really, really good. One is about understanding how economy works, and one is about the changing, how empires fall, how currencies basically devalue. According to Ray Dalio, it happens in perpetuity, literally to the dot. Like, you can calculate at which stage the empire is and at which stage it will fall. And of course, there are sources such as the fourth turning, which we'll discuss before, and the Bitcoin standard, which I'll link below as well, that point to these problems, essentially, of inflation becoming a problem. So I wanted to say why financial reasons, so first financial reason, of course, is the store of value, right? So since inflation is eating away at your savings in your fiat money, considering buying gold or Bitcoin or such stuff which cannot be inflated, maybe it's a painting of a famous painter, is actually a store of value. It will not be devaluing as rapidly as inflation is eating away from your money. Of course, the other side of it is, in many ways, it's inversely correlated to inflation, which blew my mind again, and was even more exciting aspect, because I know majority of my friends, when I talk about them about gold or Bitcoin, one of the things people see is like, oh, so I'm just gonna get rich, I'm gonna get rich, and maybe you will, maybe you don't, maybe you won't, I don't know. I'm not a fortune teller, but it blew my mind when I realized that, if one thing is always worth the same, while other things are losing value, then you can see it as if that thing gains value. It's the same thing as those apples, right? Even though the apples are the same, it seems like apples are appreciating in value because the money that you used to buy the apples with is worth less. And so in many ways, gold or Bitcoin are inversely correlated to the currency inflation, which is another reason to, of course, if you can and think long term, if you think further than the tip of your nose, I would argue you should consider hedging, as they say, against inflation by buying something that is essentially inversely correlated to it. Now, another one is obviously to bet, to diversify your portfolio. If you don't think you have an investment portfolio, well, you do. Even if you have £10 in your pocket, if you don't have anything else but you have those £10, then that's your investment. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. Of course, it's I'm saying this with a bit of a joke, because it's not going to appreciate in value. It's unlikely to appreciate in value unless the whole of the money burns around you while you still have yours. But there is this saying, I don't remember exactly how it goes, but it's very, its essence is like, you might not care about inflation, but inflation cares about you. You might not care about finance, but finance cares about you, right? Like, just because today you're not thinking about 10 years from now, well, 10 years from now is thinking about you today. And one of the things people say whenever the topic of investments comes up is like, oh, I'm not really into, I'm not into investments, I'm not into money, whatever, I don't want to be rich. Fair enough, whatever that is, but like, if you're saying that you're not into money, does that mean that you live under the bridge and that's your goal? Do you not want to be able to buy yourself food, shelter, maybe some nice clothes, I don't know, whatever you want to buy? Money, I think, is a good way to put it, is energy. And the question is where you put your energy, right? And if you say that you're not into money, does that mean you're not into energy? Does it mean that you don't want to continue living? I don't know. Food is energy, right? You eat food and that food becomes, through your body, energy that you exert to live. If you're not into money, if you're not into energy, does that not mean you're not into your body? You're not into life? Fair enough. Maybe you are. I'm obviously playing with you, but it is a weak argument or a weak weaseling out from the topic. And as I mentioned in Let's Talk About Money, I don't think we should be worried or cringe about talking about money, because it's the same way as talking about food, or as talking about going to the toilet, or as talking about sex, as talking about seeing, smelling, whatever. It's just talking about life. Like, unless you live off the grid, in the bush somewhere, you have no connection to the world, you don't have any interest in being connected to the world in any way, and therefore you have no need for money, because maybe you're all self-sufficient, you have your goats, you have your fruits, vegetables, everything is there for you, you have your water. I mean, first of all, I'm quite jealous. That sounds like a great adventure. And secondly, yeah, probably you don't have to care about money, and then I understand why you're saying you're not into money and it's a taboo topic, because why would you care? You don't need it. But unless that's the case for you, and maybe some of you are just like so, but I'm surprised that you're listening to this podcast right now if you are. Unless that's the case, you will not, I don't know how can you avoid using money in any way, shape or form. I don't know, maybe you're dependent on someone else, and so someone is using money for you, and therefore you can be quite smart and be like, I don't use money, man, like, I don't care about money, I'm above that. But my point is, if you live in the world that I live in, and if you use any sort of things that other people produced, any sort of services that other people render, then you will have to use some form of money. And yeah, maybe that means you are picking up trash on the street and then exchanging it for a few pounds to buy yourself vodka. But if that's the case, you still use money. You might just not be interested in getting more of it. You're just only interested to the extent that it gets you the vodka you're looking for. So the final point in terms of the financial reasons why not to invest in Bitcoin is, of course, this limited supply and scarcity. So by now, 95% of Bitcoin roughly has been mined ever. And you might say, wow, that's late. I'm late to the to the game. Well, of course you're not, because apparently less than 2% of the world holds any Bitcoin, and I think even less, extremely less people hold more than like £100 worth of Bitcoin, and so forth, and so forth. In terms of it being mined, the difficulty adjustment is written into the code on which Bitcoin is programmed, and so every certain number of cycles, every certain number of blocks that are being discovered, mined in this blockchain, this difficulty goes up, right? And so by the difficulty effectively doubling every few years, it's roughly every 4 years, the rate of it being mined extends, slows down, however you want to put it, each time, right? So even though 95% of Bitcoin roughly has been mined already, it will take much longer to finish this mining process than where we've been so far. That's just a little fun fact for you. But the point here in terms of supply and scarcity is that because you know how much of it there will be, and because you know no one can fake it, it is effectively much more valuable than anything else known to history so far. Maybe a painting of a famous painter. Such goods, right, that can become store of value effectively if they are, appraised by the world. But it's so different to what we're used to that I think many people simply don't wrap their heads around it. And I would urge you, if this idea made you want to turn off the episode or maybe punch me because you don't understand and you're frustrated about it, then please explore this topic further, because it is really a paradigm shift. It's mind-blowing, and once you understand it, once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's just beyond what we've known before. So I don't want to explore too much of technicalities, but my wife, I will do a disclaimer here, I am making this episode because as I was thinking what episode to record next, and I have a bunch of ones I've been working on, I did mention I'd like to maybe make an episode about Bitcoin. And she was like, yeah, you have to do it, because otherwise, you're just going to keep talking about it. Of course, low-key, she doesn't know that I'll still, or maybe she's lying to herself that I won't, but obviously I will still talk about Bitcoin probably half of my waking day anyway, or at least in my head. Unfortunately, that's what happens when you dive deep into it and you start to understand it and want to understand it more. But she did make a point that I should probably mention also some technical aspects that I've not mentioned before, and I'll briefly mention them for you here as an invitation to explore them. I will also point you in the directions to get educated in that further, but these are important aspects, right? So let's talk about security and self-custody. This is a huge thing that, it's a huge thing that people don't quite maybe grasp, or apparently not many people go beyond getting themselves some spot Bitcoin on an exchange of a sort, because it does require a certain level, a minimal level, but still a level of technical learning, and it is more responsibility driven, right? You have to take responsibility. They say not your keys, not your cheese. If you've heard that before, then maybe you've explored the topic. If you've not, please do. The point is, unless you hold your things in self-custody, an argument can be made that they are not actually yours. So for example, the money you have in your bank on your account is not as much your money as the money you have in your pocket right now. Because if the bank is closed, then I could argue for the time that the bank is closed and you cannot take out the money, that money isn't yours, right? Let's say that you need to go to the shop and buy something right now. And the only money you have is on your account, but your account was frozen for whatever reason. Maybe there is an error, maybe you run out of whatever, maybe you need to do a verification. You effectively don't have money, even if you had like millions and millions and millions of pounds on your account. If your account doesn't work, then you don't have money, right? So that's why it's useful to have some cash, right? And of course, as some of my friends would say, cash is really, really important for them, and they have lots of cash all the time. Fair enough, good point. It is the same with all the other things, right? So, if you have a bike, but you keep it at a parking that is operated by someone else, and then you need to use it, but that person went to the toilet and they will be back in 10 minutes, well, that bike for those 10 minutes isn't really yours. Of course, it is yours in a sense that, you're supposedly its owner, but because you cannot access it, you cannot use it, effectively, it's not serving the purpose it should serve. You're trying to get home as fast as possible, and now you have to wait. So for the next 10 minutes, you don't have a bike. You have to act like a person who doesn't have a bike, maybe by taking the bus. It is the same with gold and Bitcoin. It is the same with everything. If you buy Bitcoin on an exchange, whatever exchange you want to use, the moment you have it in your account on the exchange, it's not actually yours. Of course, it's more yours than it was before when you didn't buy it. But still, if the exchange is turned off, if they decide that your account is blocked, if you forget your account details, whatever, you cannot access it. And so if you cannot access it, for the time that you cannot access it, you can argue, yes, you guessed it, that it's not yours, right? And so this is where self-custody comes into play. And BTC sessions, which I'll link below, of course, is, in my opinion, the most informative, technical podcast out there. Show that the guy goes so greatly in depth into basically walking you through the different options of wallets, walking you through the different options of setups, software, hardware, private keys, seed phrases, you name it, security, self-custody, all of that. And there are also episodes dedicated to how mining works, how validation process works, how the technology works, what's the process of it all. This is what I would urge you to do. If you are convinced you shouldn't buy Bitcoin, then you should explore the idea of self-custody, putting your Bitcoin into self-custody of sort. It can be a hot wallet, it can be a cold wallet, it can be hardware-based, software-based, it can be paper wallet, whatever it is. I'm not going to go into minutiae of these. I don't feel strong enough, literate enough in those ways to explore. And I'm pretty sure I would bore you if you are here because you want to know why you shouldn't buy Bitcoin. So I'll keep it on the side. But the point here is to ensure that it's yours. You need to take self-custody. And that is a second level. I don't know, maybe third. Well, let's say that the first level is you're interested in the price. Second level, you actually buy Bitcoin and you start educating yourself about it. Third level, I would argue, is you put it in self-custody. It's really, really important. From my perspective, apart from buying Bitcoin, it's the most important thing. Because if at any point in time, someone around you, some government around you, some group around you, some whatever around you, decides that it is not okay for you to have Bitcoin, if they have access to your Bitcoin themselves, it's no longer yours. Hence the reason, put it in self-custody. Of course, it comes with risks. You need to take responsibility. And this is a big part, I think, where actually, Bitcoin and topics such as Bitcoin, gold, investments in general, actually make people be better as people. I would argue that it actually helps you become a better, more responsible person, because it pushes you. If you've not had to have any responsibility about anything before, maybe because you don't have a child yet, maybe because you don't have a wife yet, maybe because you don't even have a house yet, maybe you still live with your parents, and effectively you can be as irresponsible as it gets. If you want to have Bitcoin in self-custody, you have to take responsibility for your actions, and you will have to take responsibility for making sure that you don't forget where you put your codes and how to get there, and stuff like that. So explore this topic. It's very, very important. The most important part about it is it's effectively then considered, I would argue, cash, right? Cash in your pocket, not cash on the account. It's the moment you have Bitcoin in your self-custody is the moment you truly have it, because now if you lose it, it's lost forever. But at the same time, no one can touch it unless you fuck up or you give them the access to it, right? So it actually is yours. You don't need to ask someone's permission, or you don't need to wait for them to come back from the toilet, or to do an upgrade on their website and stuff like that. It's basically not relying on third party as the service of holding. Of course, there are risks to both options, right? As I said, there are those incredible horror stories of someone losing a hard drive from back in 2010, which probably now is worth trillions upon trillions of dollars. And I've seen like a meme a while back of that person asking people to essentially, he's willing to pay you millions upon millions of dollars if you find that on the heap of trash somewhere. But of course, I think it's a very difficult challenge to attempt. But yeah, so in terms of the wallet setup and management, I'll leave it to the best, such as BTC Sessions, to walk you through it. I'll put the link below to his channel, and I cannot urge you enough to explore that. In terms of the privacy, exploration of privacy and the need for it, You're the Voice by Efrat is the best, in my opinion, show, most informative that I've explored so far, especially in terms of how does it affect your day-to-day, digital presence and so forth, and privacy. if you want to know more, there are plenty of books, some of them more difficult, such as the Eric Voskuli's Crypto Economics, some of them less difficult, such as the Thank God for Bitcoin or the Bitcoin Standard. I'll link below a whole library for you. A part of a reason to make this episode is also for me to be able to share it with my colleagues that I talk to on the daily, and offer one place from which I would start to explore. And so it actually serves a dual purpose, not only to share it with those that encounter it for the first time, but also to share it with my family and friends when and if and as they needed. Now, let's see. What else did I note here? Okay, so I'll finish with the few final points, right? There are a few misconceptions, myths surrounding Bitcoin, and essentially almost all of them are used as a way of gaslighting people not to use it or not to care or to think that it's evil, bad, and so forth. And so those are the reasons why you shouldn't buy Bitcoin for real. First one is volatility. So if something is volatile, for example, volatile in price, then what that means in layman's terms is that its price varies greatly, right? So for example, something that is volatile in price other than supposedly Bitcoin could be stocks, right? Let's say that you have you're investing on the stock market and there is some startup which is really exciting. There is a lot of buzz about it. Many people are interested, and so the price skyrockets. It goes to the moon, and then suddenly there is a scandal. After a few weeks, it turns out that the company was fake, and the person was, saying that it's not. They were promising more than they could deliver, and so the price falls down. Sort of plummets. These differences in price could be called, great volatility, right? The price is volatile. It sort of changes rapidly. A stormy wind, a windy storm is volatile, right? It's much more volatile than if there is barely any breeze and you're sat on a huge ship. So for example, a volatile state would be to be on a really small rowing boat in the middle of a very windy, scary ocean during a storm, and a very small volatility would be presented by a huge tanker going down the coast of a really calm, seaside and on a sunny day. So of course, the story behind Bitcoin is that it's very volatile, right? Even right now, as I recorded, we've just experienced a drawdown, as it's called, which is like a drawdown of the price of Bitcoin, supposedly by 30% or more. And that could be considered volatile, right? From the perspective of someone analyzing the movements of the price, it seems like the price is changing very, very rapidly, and so they say that Bitcoin is volatile. And from the perspective of looking at it as the price in fiat, which is by decree, the money that we have been using because the government tells us to, the money that you have in your wallet, essentially in your pocket, that's fiat commonly. Although it's not that common to understand that is a fiat money, we just call it money until we dive into rabbit holes. When priced in fiat, Bitcoin seems to be very volatile. But if you price Bitcoin in Bitcoin, it's not volatile at all, right? It's on a steady rise because it's being mined steadily, and every 4 years or so, the mining rate halves, sort of. And if it's just a shift of perspective, a different perspective. If you value Bitcoin by its value in Bitcoin, then it's fixed. 1 Bitcoin will always be 1 Bitcoin. Where the difference is, $1 is not likely to stay always $1. Effectively, $1 10 years ago is probably worth more like 60 cents now. I don't know exactly, check that, but effectively that's the point. So only if you look through the perspective of the volatility being priced in fiat, it seems like Bitcoin is varying in price. And of course, now come back to the point from before. If it's inversely correlated to inflation, then effectively you know for a fact that it will appreciate in price, it will appreciate in value in fiat as fiat loses value over time. So if every year your pound is worth 10% less, in pounds, that Bitcoin, which just stays the same, it's always 1 Bitcoin worth 1 Bitcoin, will be worth 10% more in pounds. It will seem like it's worth more, but actually it's the pound that is going to be worth less. Of course, the value on the market is the reasons for the value on the market are more than just inflation and stuff like that. There are many reasons. There are hysterias, there are people advertising. Market is the market. You don't know. Maybe tomorrow there's going to be a fashion to sit on the desks and work on the chairs. And then, the value of chairs will suddenly explode. Or maybe from tomorrow we will not be using chairs and therefore chairs will be rendered useless. That's the market. The market is, the market sorts itself out if you let it, essentially. But to tackle this idea of Bitcoin being volatile, just change the perspective. The moment you value Bitcoin in Bitcoin terms, it's not volatile at all. It's extremely boring. And it's actually showing not how volatile Bitcoin is, but how volatile all the market around Bitcoin is. So instead of seeing this shaking, coin, now put the coin, don't move it, and shake the world. That's the change in perspective that I would invite you to try and explore. Second myth is, of course, very popularly advertised by the industry that doesn't like to be pointed out as not necessarily the greatest, that it's only for criminals, right? Of course, it can be used and it has been used for paying for illegal things before, but so was cash. So was everything else. So it's a very weak argument, and it's an argument that if you are looking for a reason why you shouldn't buy Bitcoin, then that is a good emotional reason. Why would you want to support something that is being used by criminals? But the thing is, everything can be used by criminals, and everything has been used by criminals, and it's unlikely that will change. So whatever, I think criminals also make themselves tea. So maybe you should stop drinking tea because it could be used by criminals. So yeah, your money for sure has been used by criminals. My money for sure has been used by criminals. It's just a part of life that criminals will use whatever they want to use. And so an argument against something because it was used by criminals is simply, it's a bit weak. Now the final, and I'll try to make a point here, but of course this topic yet again is a very, very extensive one, and actually for this one I would encourage you to explore the shows that I've mentioned plus others that I'll mention below. I might even try to find an episode especially related to this, but there is a big myth around Bitcoin being environmentally unfriendly because it consumes so much energy, and so that's bad. Well, of course, without consuming that energy to begin with, Bitcoin wouldn't be as safe and as valuable as it is. And so if you are suggesting to use less energy to mine Bitcoin, what you're suggesting is effectively to be able to print it for free. And that's exactly what we're trying to avoid by using it, because then someone can abuse it, and they do at all times, ad infinitum, forever, ever since they came up with that idea. Now, there is another aspect to it, which actually is that, and this is not really liked by any environmentalist advertising out there, especially over the past few years. Raising levels of life, raising levels of, raising levels of one's life. Let's say that you have more money now than you had before, and so you can afford better things, and you can afford to plan the future, you can afford to live more and work less, actually shows that people care more about the environment the moment they have more. So one of the best things we can do to make environment around us better is to get people out of poverty. And so that's a big argument for adopting a currency, a money that cannot be stolen effectively, cannot be faked, cannot be printed, and therefore you don't have to be running to outrun the inflation with your working. You can relax more and more into your life and care more about the environment. And it makes sense, Imagine trying to care about the environment if you cannot feed your kids. Imagine trying to care about your friend if you cannot get out of bed because you're ill. It's the same thing. We don't care about things other than ourselves and the safety and security of ourselves and our loved ones until we can, because that's sorted. So an argument that putting people out of poverty through Bitcoin, through gold, is somehow bad for the environment is simply faulty. And now there is another layer to it, a more technical one, which I can only explain as far as I can, to the degree that I can in all my stupidity, is that mining Bitcoin, for example, in Bhutan, in a country in Asia called Bhutan, has been done via very environmentally friendly means. More than that, because as miners exert energy, they actually warm themselves up. That energy, that warming, can be used for other things. So you could recycle the energy that is being generated by the miners to mine Bitcoin to, for example, maybe heat your house. I'm not inviting you to do so. Maybe you wouldn't want a hum and drum of servers all around you, and I don't know if it's that healthy to be sleeping next to an electric grid. But the point is that there are ways of using both using the environmentally friendly technologies to mine Bitcoin and therefore raise people out of poverty and therefore raise the level of one's life and help the environment. But also that mining itself can be used to reuse that energy somewhere else. And the biggest case, the greatest case to be made there is if on a family, local level, when you raise yourself out of poverty, when you raise yourself from a constant chasing of your own tail to make your ends meet, and you start caring about the environment more, think how much of a change it will be to the world when everyone can have that chance and takes it. How much better will the world look like if we don't have to slave away every day to try and make our ends meet, but we can spend time out and garden. We can spend time out planting trees. We can spend time out and go clean the beach. I remember at university we did those activities of a day to walk on the beach and clean it, because there was so much trash either from the sea or from people just using the beach. Imagine how much better the beach will look like on the daily basis if I can do it every day, because I don't have to be at work all of my day and then after work try to make my ends meet, make food, go to sleep and repeat. So, of course there are other aspects to this environmental impact and energy consumption, and I'm too weak of an orator and an understander of this topic to be convincing you any further. But in layman's terms, it's simply a weak argument, because whatever technology, whatever use Bitcoin might have to ensure that you live a better, more abundant life, it will affect the environment better, unless you're a prick and you're going to use all of that spare time to make the environment worse. But in the first place, if that's the case, then you wouldn't use the environmentally friendly or unfriendly argument against Bitcoin, right? Or maybe you're a complete cynic and so forth, but I doubt it. If you've gotten this far in this episode, you're either really waiting for this reason why you shouldn't buy Bitcoin, or you're simply one of those people that is open to explore a new topic. So I applaud you for making it here. And yeah, I hope that that this was quite useful. Now, a few more things that I wanted to mention before I close is, especially from the point of view of people who are trying to get more money. And I understand that, I want to get more money, right? Wouldn't you? I want to be able to not have a job. I want to be able to spend my free time at all times with my loved one, maybe, riding horses with her, or traveling the world, recording this podcast all the time. That's the future I want. That's the future I'm building. That doesn't mean that I should right now risk and leverage and over leverage and borrow and bet on anything. And, of course, yet again, this is not financial advice. This is an episode about why you shouldn't buy Bitcoin. Now, as Bitcoin became an everyday topic, although not for everyone, but, even in the media, Bitcoin has become, especially in the United States, after the elections recently and around it, there is a temptation fueled by banks and financial institutions to borrow against Bitcoin or to bet on Bitcoin, but not actually buying it. So I actually had a discussion today with a friend of mine from work, which actually spun this episode idea, because I was expressing my frustration about his attitude to my wife after work, where he mentioned that since he knows, or we can tell, that the price of Bitcoin will go up now, then he's gonna make an option bet, which essentially means he will borrow money from the exchange to get more money if he's right. And let's say that it's called trading, right? You can do it. Many of my friends do as well, which, fair enough. I don't think it's a good idea, but let's say that some people think it is. I'll just try to make a case why it isn't. I don't know what the future holds. I know that tomorrow I'm trying to be in a better situation than I was today. And I know that my emotional brain, my reptilian brain, my greed, which is great. I am a very greedy person. When I feel greedy, very, very greedy. I don't know if I mentioned to you guys, but I actually fell into a trap of a scam before, simply because they used my greed. yeah, I'm a greedy guy. What can I tell? What can I say? I'm pretty sure many of us are greedy, especially when it comes to money, especially when it comes to playing maybe at a casino or maybe betting, stuff like that. And that's exactly how you get yourself hurt. I have no doubt that I could make so much money by betting on where the market will go. But I am worried that I can also lose much more money that I have because of this greed and because of the fear that I have. Because I'm also a very fearful person. I recognize that I get scared sometimes. And unless I understand fundamentally what I'm doing, and that way I can feel a bit less scared, I will probably get scared. And this is a huge, huge caveat right now what I'm saying. If after this episode you are convinced you shouldn't buy Bitcoin, wink wink, then don't, please, for the love of God, don't jump into betting on anything. Educate yourself first. Understand why you're, doing what you're doing, and understand why it is so important for me telling you right now not to make any bets. Just buy Bitcoin, hold it in self-custody, and get on with your life. Don't be looking at the spreadsheets. Don't be reading the charts. Don't be trying to time the market. Don't be following some, exclusive, amazing trader, Instagram celebrity guy. Simply stack sats, as we say in the Bitcoin community, buy some Bitcoin, put it in self-custody, and get on with your life. There is a meme like, just touch grass, go out and touch grass, spend time with your family. I promise you that it will be more boring than trading, and it will be less scary than trading, and it will be more safe than trading. And of course, some of you will still trade, and that's fine. Good luck. I hope for you genuinely to achieve your success. Knowing myself, knowing how greedy I can be, and knowing how fearful I can be, I simply don't want to put myself in that position. It is too risky for me to risk the future of my family, the future of my future kids, the future of my health, the future of my wife, on trying to bet, guess, time the market, the future, stuff like that. And I know that, even going through a few dips in the Bitcoin price, ever since I started being interested in it, I still feel a little tingle of wonder, worry. What is going on? How does that work? Will it be okay? And I have no doubt that if I had any leverage, which is a financial jargon for borrowed money against my bet, which can be to my benefit or to my detriment, I would be acting very, very differently. And if you don't know how you would act, go to a casino, make a bet. I go to a casino every year for New Year's Eve with my friends and my family sometimes. We've been doing this for a few years now. It has become a bit of a tradition. I love it. That's the only time I'm in a casino, maybe apart from one time that I attended a casino at a horse ranch with my wife in Slovenia, and I failed completely. But I go there, I play roulette, and I feel the tingle of emotions or of winning and losing. I feel the fear when I'm losing. I feel the greed when I'm winning. And I can observe in my friends how they win a lot and then they lose it all, or how they lose it all and then they buy again, because hope, is a big thing. Greed is a big thing. Fear is a big thing. If you don't know how you will act as a trader, first go to a casino or play a poker night game with your friends at home for £10 and just see how you act. I promise you, you will be surprised if you've not seen yourself be greedy or fearful. And that's exactly how people get tripped. And then they fail, and then they suffer, and then they message people like myself and tell them, why did you tell me not to buy Bitcoin, you piece of shit, you know? I genuinely hope that no one out there will get hurt because of hearing my stupid ideas. And it's all up to you anyway. It's your responsibility, it's your money, it's your life. I'm just here providing entertainment. I'm speaking from the heart. I'm also venting all this energy so then my wife can bear an evening less of me talking about Bitcoin. Here we are, I'll share with you a bunch of materials, I promise. There is one podcast which I've recently discovered, which is, I would say, a more macro world outlook podcast that really helped me make sense of the world. It's run by Simon Dixon, and it's just called Bitcoin Hard Talk. I will link it below as well. All of these, Simply Bitcoin, the What is Money Show, Once Bitten, a Bitcoin podcast, You're the Voice, Natalie Brunell, Coin Stories podcast. There's so many. What Bitcoin Did, Simon Dixon's podcast. All of these shows, all of these amazing shows and programs. Bitcoin News, Citadel News, all of these are amazing sources of information. BTC sessions as well, amazing sources of information. And I would urge you to, most importantly, educate yourself. What you've just experienced, if you've listened through to this part of the episode, is just a rant of some random guy who's been trying to understand this topic for hundreds of hours. I am nowhere near to understand it as much as others before me. And it's not a race, it's not a competition, it's for your own benefit. I would argue that if you are tomorrow more educated, more knowledgeable, more understanding of the world than today, then you've achieved success from that day. Just try to be 1% better tomorrow than you were today. And similarly, try to be 1% minimum, whatever, 0.5% more wealthy tomorrow than you are today. And 1% more healthy tomorrow than you are today. 1% more grateful, more loving, more whatever you want to be tomorrow than you are today. So if after this episode you're convinced you shouldn't buy Bitcoin, then I will consider my job done. If you are convinced you should buy it, then damn, I failed miserably, and sorry to be wasting your time. I hope that this was useful. I hope that it will make you at least wonder about this topic and not dismiss it as a crazy, stupid, boring, wacky digital money, online shitcoin stuff. And remember, Bitcoin only. I've not talked about other cryptocurrencies for a reason. And once you educate yourself about Bitcoin, you'll understand why I've not talked about any other shitcoin out there. So other than that, please, if you've liked this episode, follow, subscribe. It helps me to make this podcast a real adventure of my lifetime, and with every day it does become. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for sharing it with friends. Thank you so much for your comments, for your messages, and I genuinely hope that you'll have a better, wealthier, happier, safer, more private, more independent life into the future, thanks to my rant end runs of those amazing people before me. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. Stay happy, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.